I'm Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. My guest today needs no introduction. Beth Underhill's career in show jumping has spanned more than 35 years. Beth has 3 silver medals for Canada at the Pan American Games and represented Canada at the 1992 Olympics in Barcelona. She has also ridden in more than 25 Nations Cup competitions, most recently in Santiago, helping Canada win a silver medal and secure a team spot for the upcoming Olympics in Paris. Beth, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So take me back to when you first came into the sport. I read a very interesting story about that you had actually been in a Royal Conservatory music program for singing in your early teens, and that you shifted gears and went into riding. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, well, it all started. My family has always been animal lovers, avid animal lovers, and my mother was certainly someone who felt it was important that her children had a wide variety of interests. And even though we weren't horsey in any way, and my parents weren't, my mother introduced me to riding through the YMCA. So I started just at a very small riding school, and I was 8 years old, and just did some basic riding lessons until my family bought a farm, an old dilapidated country home in Uxbridge. And my father bought me 2 ponies and a farm bell at an auction, and for $60.
Wow.
So I had Shetland ponies called Teddy and Stardust that I remember vividly. And that was really the beginning. So we really didn't have a very, a strong education in the sport or in the horses, but I definitely had the love for the sport early on. Singing was something that was another part of, my education that my mother introduced me to, and something I enjoyed very much. But when the time came, as I was in my early teens, to, with school, etc., I had to make some choices as to what I was really wanting to follow through with. And riding just was the natural choice for me, and show jumping.
And at that point, who were you training with?
Her name was Diane Thompson, and she was from England originally. And my parents had emigrated to from England in the mid-50s. So I think my mother gravitated towards Diana because she was a bit of a kindred spirit. And Diana actually rode Arabian horses in costume classes and had nothing, but she had a background in good, solid training from Britain. And she taught me all the basics. And even though she really wasn't a show jumper, she was a tough taskmaster. And I learned a lot from her, a lot of life lessons and a lot of, a lot to do with horsemanship. And so she was my first main instructor that got me started in jumping. And then I would have to say one of the most important things that happened was we joined the local pony club, the Toronto North York Pony Club. And in those days, we were really fortunate because a lot of the top equestrian riders would help out and do rallies and give lessons. And so I'd get lessons from Jimmy Elder and Christalot Hanson Boylan and Tommy Gayford. Dick Day was across the street. So that was an education that could not have been replicated anywhere. And when I look back on those opportunities, and it was a really family-oriented pony club. My parents used to go. You'd sit around in the evenings, and there'd be campfires and movies, and just everyone talking about horses and learning about horses. So for me, I feel really lucky that I was introduced to the sport in that way because it was such a diverse program. It wasn't, as you see today, where the training is so regimented. It got me a very broad spectrum education, but also you had the ability to do dressage, to do a little bit of eventing, and you understood lots about different avenues that could be taken in the sport. And as I say, I naturally gravitated towards show jumping, but I really look back on having the opportunity to, delve into other parts of it with a lot of, Yeah, a lot of happy memories.
Yeah, and I imagine just getting basics in all those disciplines, which really helps in show jumping, was a big benefit.
Absolutely. And learning, and also there was a lot of camaraderie. There was Prince Philip games and competitions amongst the rally members. And I have to say, I was such a student of the sport, and I aced the written work. And then I remember I failed my C test because I put one of the bandages on backwards, which is obviously a big
Oh
no. So,
my, oh dear.
but anyway, so you learned, and again, they were tough taskmasters. I mean, if you made a mistake, you failed and you had to go back and pick yourself up. And whether it was the riding aspect or the horsemanship part of it, stable management, it was good lessons to learn right from the beginning. So, and I was fortunate. I had my two ponies at home, and it was, my dad would get up and help me in the mornings, but I, would have to look after my ponies before school and after school. And they weren't easy. They were wretched little ponies that would just as soon buck you off as go for a ride. So, yeah, I learned to keep getting up and trying again, but I loved it, loved every part of it.
I bet. So when did you get your first horse and who was that?
Well, interestingly enough, and this is really bizarre, that my trainer instructress, I should say at the time, Diana, who I still keep in touch with. She always checks up on me and messages me. So I'm fortunate to still have her in my life. But she got us a horse that was half Arab and half trotter, a half standardbred trotter. And it was a chestnut mare on top of all of that with a lot of chrome. She had a big white blaze, and her name was Comet's Thunder. And I, of course, was going through a stage of, I went from being Beth, and I insisted on being called Elizabeth for a while. And I changed my horse's name to Zara because I was reading a book about the horse in the book was called Zara. So, I mean, you can imagine this picture. But the thing was, the horse could jump. I mean, she was about 15.2. And we used to go to these local shows. And I kid you not, we would do a trotting race in the morning, and then I would do the jumping in the afternoon, and she would do really well at both. That's hard to imagine now when you think of how the sport has changed and evolved. But I tell you, again, it was lessons learned, and she was a dynamite little horse, and she taught me a lot. She was very competitive. She was fast, and she was careful. And I think we paid $800 for her. She was very in it, but that was my first horse. And yeah, that was my introduction to show jumping and
And
trotting.
and and how old were you then?
I would have been 14.
Oh gosh. Okay. So
Yeah.
you accomplished a lot in a long time, like in a very short time.
Yeah. I mean, I had a variety of ponies at that time. I used to go to this. There was a sales barn, auction house in Stouffville, which was near Uxbridge, when I was around that age. And I used to buy ponies in the auction for cheap and then make them up and sell them. I mean, my profit margin was low, but I did a little bit of that. I did a little buying and selling early on, and learned to make them up myself. I had a lesson maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, but a lot I had to figure out on my own. And I think, again, that's something that has held me in good stead because, you learn to experiment, you learn to ride instinctively. You learn to be brave. It was just, I used to build jumps in our backyard and just out of twigs and bark and sticks and practice over them. So it was a very varied upbringing in the industry. And I don't think many people did it that way at my level now, but I don't regret any part of it. And my family is very much an integral part of it as well.
Yeah, and I would imagine you learned a lot of really good keys that would help you in the business, just the buying and selling, what's involved. That's a very big part of what most horse people have to do day to day just to survive. So to learn
Exactly.
that skill at such a young age, I'm thinking that probably really has stood you in good stead. So I know that Torchy Miller was a big part of your training experience as well in your life. At what point did you meet him, and how did that all happen?
Well, I had gone to Edmonton for a year and a half to be a working student with Mark Laskin. And I came back to Canada, back to Eastern Canada, from Edmonton, and I was looking for a job. And Torchy, I had a really good junior jumper, and I was a bit rough around the edges for sure. I needed to be more technically proficient, but I think Torchy saw something in me, some natural ability, and I think my work ethic as well. And he offered me a position, riding, some of his horses at that time. He was maybe getting towards the end of his career. He had a busy stable. He definitely had an eye for helping young people at that time. And I was very fortunate to become, associated with Torchy at that time. So that really, he got me. That was my first Grand Prix horse, came through Torchy, and that was Monopoly. One of his clients had brought the horse in for training, and he had a history of stopping, actually, and so Torchy didn't want to ride him. So he gave me the ride on the horse, which, I mean, how fortunate was I to have that? But yes, Torchy created a lot of opportunities for me and became an incredible mentor and friend over the years, and still is today.
So that's very interesting because I mean, I think everybody knows you as Monopoly in the early years. I had no idea that that's how the ride came about, nor would I have ever suspected that Monopoly had any kind of stop in him. So I feel like you burst on the scene in 1990 with him at the Royal Winter Fair, and then you went on to win 2 silver medals at the Pan American Games in 1991 in Havana. And then the very next year, you were off to Barcelona in 1992 with Monopoly. Um, how did you navigate all that? That seems like a lot of great success and a lot of new experiences to tackle, with your first Grand Prix horse. Who helped you, and how did you tackle all of that?
I think by that time I'd had a lot of experience, not at the team level, of course, but in terms of working and riding. Like I say, I was with Mark for 18 months, who was instrumental, in adding to what I knew already. And he was such he was an incredible rider and horseman, and young. And so because he was closer actually to my age, he was someone that I really looked up to and someone I learned a lot from. I think the experiences I'd had to that point were very effective in helping me withstand the pressure. It was something I'd waited a long time to get to the team level. So by the time that opportunity came about, I was ready mentally, and I really felt that this was a goal that I'd wanted since I was a little girl, to represent Canada. So I found that part of it just, it seemed like I had always just needed the horse. And now I had the horse, I was going to make that opportunity count. The people that helped me at that time were Torchy, obviously, because he was still he was the trainer, and I was working for Torchy still at the time. Tommy Gayford was our chef de keep, who was instrumental in making me feel comfortable and always being honest and always being a great cheerleader and giving you confidence going into the ring. He was a tremendous chef. He was one of the best. And Ian Miller, as my teammate. The first time I was on the team, I actually had the chance to do 3 in a row because I was good the first time. So I got the call to go to the second show, fortunately. So in those days, it was Washington, New York, and the Royal. And so we did those, one after the other. So it was really a very fast learning curve of, like I said, dealing with the pressure, dealing with what it took to be a team member. And Ian was tough. He was not someone who let someone into that rarefied realm easily. You had to earn your stripes. And if you didn't pull your weight or you let the team down, he had no compunction about telling you exactly how and why and how it was not going to happen again. So that was a very interesting month for me of just, the chance, it's very unusual that you would get the opportunity to be on a Nations Cup team 3 times in a row like that. And so by the time I got to the Royal, I felt like I had, experienced a lot in a very short period of time.
And who else was on that team in Barcelona?
In Barcelona, it
Yes.
was, it was Jennifer, and it was Jay Hayes, and it was Ian and myself, and Harold Chopping was
Oh, wow.
the spare.
Okay. No, I was just trying to picture just sort of the personalities. So
Jennifer
yeah, that
Foster, of course, on
okay.
Big Chestnut Zeus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I had forgotten all about her. I can honestly say that. Gosh, that
Yeah,
was a
you put
long
me on the
time ago.
spot. I remember.
Sorry. I'm impressed that you remember.
And the
So,
irony was in 2022,
mhm.
I went back to Barcelona for the Nations Cup finals, and what's that, 30 years later, so that was kind of an irony as well, to go back to where the Olympics were held, the exact same ring, the exact same configuration. So yeah, went full circle.
Yeah, and I am curious because a lot of amateurs have asked me to ask this of you. At that high level of jumping, is there ever a moment that you have any fear? Have you ever walked into one of those rings in those early years and thought, oh my gosh, am I ready for this? Or had a just sort of a moment of terror?
I think that everyone seems to feel naturally, young riders in particular, think that, oh, you get to a certain point and those butterflies go away or that fear goes away. I'm here to tell you that's absolutely not true. And anyone who says it is not being quite forthright. Absolutely. You think about everything. You think about, and obviously it depends on the situation. And when you're in a team situation, you feel very much the responsibility of the opportunity and privilege actually that you have, which is a different kind of pressure. But of course, you have fear of the unknown. How are you going to perform? You have fear of, is my horse prepared correctly? Have I, built up for this event in the right manner? That jump looks really huge. Does my horse have enough scope? What happens if, XYZ? There's always a variety of, mishaps you could run through in your mind. And also physical fear. I mean, we all know this is a very dangerous sport. So if we didn't go in there with a healthy fear of, or trepidation of what can go wrong, I think you're being, foolish, quite honestly. So you have to learn to manage that. And in my experience, it's always I do a lot of visualization. I would always take a quiet moment to myself and I would run through the course. I always like to see the course very early, even, just on a course map. So I had a real sense of exactly how I wanted to ride the track, knowing my horse's strengths and weaknesses, knowing my own weaknesses, and, mapping it out in my mind, how I wanted it to go. Having said that, you also have to be able to make adjustments on the fly and not be afraid of that. But that visualization helped me a lot always. And I always have this fear of forgetting courses. So when I was a kid, I used to forget courses a lot. And that again, I think was stemmed from nerves. I was always anxious. I was, whatever I always had performance anxiety, and my nerves would come out when I would, forget a course or a turn or a track or something. So, I was always acutely aware of that. So to me, it was preparation. When you stepped in the ring, you take a breath, you run over the course and your visualization one last time, and then you let it go. And then your focus is on the job and on riding the best you can. So I think it comes partly from experience, a lot of practice, confidence in your ability, but it's also a mindset. It's a mindset of what you expect of yourself and the performance. Sometimes we fall short, but I think once that bell goes and you pick up the canter, that all the nerves disappear.
That's good. That leads me to two other questions right along that same, I guess, area. First off, how do you memorize courses? I've had this conversation with other riders, and it's quite fascinating to me about how different people memorize the actual course. I myself do have to visualize the entire course, and when I walk a course, I have to walk every step that I'm going to take, because I am very visual and I want to see what I'm going to be looking at. But I see other riders who just literally can walk a line and then go along to somewhere else, and they're just basically kind of memorizing the numbers. So I wondered, A, how do you actually visualize and memorize? And then B, when you're on course, do you break it down into chunks?
Like I said, I like to go have the paper first. I like to have it on paper and read it and go the jump off and visualize the track, like you said. When I walk, I would agree with you. I always, for a big event, okay, maybe not a small one when the course walks short or whatever, but for sure, anything over 1.30 meters, I'm going to walk every track and go around and look at, and I think most people do or should, because the time alloweds now are so fast. You have to have a sense of where you're going to make up time. Am I going to go inside that island? Am I going to go around it? How quickly can I turn back to this? So I definitely would walk that. So I don't necessarily walk everything on the turn in terms of measurements. Some people do. I would for the jump off. But yes, the more familiarity for me, the better, and the more repetition. I would walk the course first and have a sense of it. And then I would always go back and walk the entire course a second time for sure. And then I'd likely go back and walk a third or fourth time, not necessarily the whole course, but certain lines that I want to just, really reiterate if there's a question mark, because nowadays they rarely build on a 12-foot step. It's always on a quarter, 3/4 stride or a half stride. So I like to have the variables in my mind of if this happens or that happens, what's my plan B? So yeah, repetition for me is key. And I think breaking it down, it was interesting. I never forgot this. I was with a friend who rode the same trainer, and we were going over a course, and she went really fast on the course and on the stand. She said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And I was like, oh, I wish I could do that, that I could do it that fast and just retain it. And she went in and went off course. And it was so fast, she didn't imprint it in her mind. And it was a lesson for me. I was like, okay, I was actually doing it the way that worked for me. And, for most people. And that's, like you said, one step at a time. When I go in the ring, I think again, because the time alloweds are so fast, you really do need to think of the course as a single entity and a flow and a track and a rhythm. But obviously the related lines you're going to section, if this is a 4 to a 7 to a, 1 stride to a combination or whatever, you're going to section that line out a little bit more as how I'm tracking from the first part of the line through to the last part of the line. But yeah, I very much, preparation is absolutely key, and for the jump off as well, because when you look at the fractions of seconds that determine the winners and being in 10th place, it's very, very important to have all that information.
Thank you for sharing all that. And also you touched on just how important the psychology aspect of riding is. And I would say I do find it fascinating. I've heard riders at so many different levels express a bit of anxiety after or before they've gone in the ring. What do you do to cope with that anxiety and that extra stress? Because I do think in riding, even more than any other sport, it seems to me that you really do have to control your brain, because if you don't, your horse feels all that stress and anxiety, and that can make them stressed and anxious.
Yes, and like I said, I think that you know, you can't deny the fact that I think the first thing is accepting that that's
Mm,
normal and that
mhm,
stress and anxiety and performance worries is part and parcel of what we do, and not shy away from that because everyone feels that way. Enrique Van Ackerman feels that way. I mean, I know that there's nobody else, nobody that's immune to that. So, and I think it's really, it's something that practice, putting yourself in a position of pressure as much as possible, whether that means you're practicing at home with other people and watching them go and then you and making it, feel like you're in a repeating that position a little bit or situation, I think is important. And it really comes from focus and from understanding yourself and what you need. For me to have the least pressure is to have the most preparation. And that
mm,
means being at the ring an hour before the course walk and actually, getting myself in the mindset early and knowing, having all my tack and equipment organized well in advance, not wondering where my jacket is or where my spurs are or where my helmet is. I mean, all of those, it's a simple thing, but
mm.
when you're rushing around looking for things or not being, having your horse at the ring in plenty of time, that's the first thing where my blood pressure goes up, is if the horse is, late to the ring, or if I haven't organized my time properly. So I think that that's the number one thing that I want every other uh, anything that's going to affect me and take away my focus from the job at hand, I want that erased. And I think it's really a matter of practice and just being, for me, having that quiet time beforehand to
Mm.
consider, to speculate on what the day is going to bring and what the class, how I want that to go, is very important. But I think everyone has their own measure of what works for them. And that's part of it, is that self-awareness of what works for me.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would say I probably have a lot of those sort of routines in my show day. And I also, in the last couple of years, have just started with sort of a relaxation technique that I do about 10 minutes before I'm getting ready to get on. And I find that just sort of takes the whole stress level down a notch. But yeah, I would say proper preparation is key. It's nothing can throw off your day like you can't find your spurs or your gloves or just I don't know the lucky charm that you wear. I do have a lucky thing that I wear, and I even find I'm the sort of person that have a certain outfit that I may wear on the Saturday versus the Sunday. Do you have anything like that going on?
Yeah, I mean, I used to get a little too crazy, and that way I had to
Okay.
have this pair of pants on this particular day, and because I'd been successful on that, and it got to
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit. I stopped myself because I was going down a rabbit hole that I thought was not healthy. And I think all athletes are, you tend to have a little OCD because you're so, you want absolute control of your environment as much as possible. And I think that that's something that we all feel, and you understand how much luck can be involved in the sport. So, but you have to be very careful that you don't lean to that side too much, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, fair enough. So now I'm going to change paces and go on to some of the great horses that you've ridden over the years. And it was interesting in researching for this interview. I never realized that Altair, one of your next great horses after Monopoly, came from Stall Hendricks. And so, if I read the story correctly, it was just sort of by happenstance that you came across him, that he was at some little local show while you were in the Netherlands, and that you watched him. And maybe tell our audience a little bit about how that all unfolded.
Well, it was, when you look back on it, it seemed like kismet, and I do believe in those things as well, that sometimes, the path, you don't always see where it's going, but it leads you somewhere special. And in this case, it did. And we'd been in Europe, based at the Hendricks that summer, because we were on the team and for Den Haag for the World Championships, and I had Monopoly there. And my other teammates went back to Canada to compete in Canada, and I didn't have another horse to go back for. So I stayed and just hung around with Paul and Emile, and Paul was going to a local horse show, and I went along with him. And as you say, it was quite a small show. And Paul went off to see a horse, and I just was sitting at the side of the ring, and I saw Altair come in, and I couldn't believe, I fell in love with the horse immediately. And I went running over to Paul, and I'm like pulling on his sleeve. I saw a horse. It looks amazing. And it turned out that I didn't get the whole story at the beginning, but ultimately the horse had actually been sold and had not worked out, and had had a bit of an issue with combinations. And the horse had come back to be redeveloped and resold. So he wasn't really on the market at that moment. They were, bringing him back to some small shows to get his confidence. And, he obviously was a very talented jumper, but he was almost too careful. And I never ever would have had the opportunity to have the horse normally. It was just a matter of being in the right place at the right time. And Paul didn't know me well, but he knew me well enough from the time I was there that I think he felt, that maybe there's an association here that would be beneficial for all of us. And I think that he knew my dreams and aspirations, and he knew I would take good care of Altair, and I would take the time with him that was needed. He made that very clear to me. And they actually retained a percentage of the horse, because for me, it was very expensive. I needed to syndicate him or do something in order to afford him. And Paul and Emile were very kind and helped me with that by retaining a percentage of him. So it just was something that the timing and everything came together at the right time, and also was the beginning of a very, long relationship with the Hendricks then, and they're great friends of mine to this day.
Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like they recognized the special connection between the two of you, which is interesting, because I would say you could see it from outside the ring. I would honestly tell you that I do remember that heads would turn when you two came into the ring. Like, there was something special between the two of you beyond just his talent. So that speaks volumes to Paul and Emile, I think, also as horsemen, to recognize that in the two of you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. No, I do think he was, a very special horse in your life, as was Monopoly. So his career ends sadly because of an injury, and now you're horseless for a little bit, are you not? As far as horses at that level?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And then if I'm remembering correctly, Top Gun was the next sort of big Grand Prix horse. Have I got that correct? That we saw you with after Altair?
That's right.
Okay. And where did that come about? Because I was also going to say we should speak to what I fully appreciate in your situation is that you didn't have somebody backing you along the way, that you had to fund these horses through either syndicates or friends and family in order to help you get to the next level. So where did Top Gun come from, and who helped you, I guess, finance that?
Well, I didn't own him. He
Okay.
was owned by a client. So
Oh.
I was training their daughter, and I was riding a couple of horses, well, more than a few that they owned, and Top Gun was one of them. And he'd actually been purchased by Ainsley Vince, and she had developed him at the beginning of his career and done, very well with him. And I got him just when he was on the brink of starting to do bigger classes. And he was a very generous horse. He wouldn't have had all the scope in the world, but he was a very kind, giving horse who you could teach well. He was very good, very responsive, and in his training, he always tried to do his best. And he was a bit of a worrier, actually, himself. He was a horse you had to keep relaxed, but he did some wonderful things for me, and we had a really lovely career. We were on the winning Nations Cup team in Florida one year, and he was a horse I really enjoyed to ride because, like I say, he was a horse who was just very generous.
And if I'm not mistaken, you qualified for the World Equestrian Games with him, did you not? Was that Top
Yeah.
Gun?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought. And then when he came out of your roster, which I'm sure had to be tough, I was presuming to go back to the daughter. Is that or going on to
Yes.
yeah, okay.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say that that has to be so hard as a rider. Obviously, you train these horses for the clients. You're trying to, build a future for these animals. But when they've achieved that level of success with you and you have that chemistry with them, I always think it must, I can only imagine what it's like to have to give them up. And yes, you're going to see them continue their career with someone else, but you never know what they might have been capable of had they stayed with you. Is that a tough part of the sport for you?
Oh, it is. It's the toughest part because of like you say, in order to be successful with a horse, there needs to be a partnership, and that partnership is something that goes beyond just riding in the ring and having success. It's you're working with these horses every day, not just on the flat and the jumping, but in their stables and their caregiving and everything. So they become essential members of your family, in my view. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's very hard to lose them. But it's a difficult, the hardest part of the sport is the resilience you have to have and to keep bouncing back from loss. And you're going to sustain a lot of loss. And yeah, it's tough unless you are in a financial position that you can own your own horses or and they're protected. That's everyone has is a little bit at the whim of the owners or of a horse being sold. Any variable can happen to break up the partnership, and it's tough. No question.
It's so interesting because one of the words I wrote down here to describe you was resilient.
Out
And
of necessity.
yeah, no, that was like labeled for me to address because I feel like, yes, because of what you've gone through, I would say that's the first word that comes to mind because you've worked so hard. I mean, that and I think determination and braveness also describe you. But I think you have worked so hard and then you lose one and then you're back at it. Might not see you in the ring at high levels for a few years, but you're back at it. So that brings me to the next big horse, which was Count Me In. And I still remember seeing Count Me In with you and going, wow, this is a Beth horse. just even the presence physically of the horse when you entered the ring, you just again you commanded attention. So where did Count Me In come from, and what was that story?
Well, his owners actually, whom I didn't know, came to me out of the blue, and they had this horse, and he was meant to. I think he'd been. The owner was a dressage rider, and he was meant to be a dressage horse, but clearly wasn't the right type. And he tended to jump out of his paddock, and they kept him at home at their farm. And so they thought perhaps he, would like to be a jumper. And they brought him to me, and I think he was 5 rising 6 at the time. And it was, I loved his type. He was you didn't know at that time the horse he would become. He had a bit of an unconventional front end. He was quite a lot of blood. And you would question how much scope he had. That would be the first question when you saw him. But he, again, was a horse who was very competitive, very strong-willed, probably one of the most physically strong, sound horses I ever had. Like for years and years, the horse he just had a constitution like no other horse. I mean, I think partly it was his size. He's a very small horse, but he was very mighty in his outlook on life, and he was very strong-willed and strong-minded, which made him difficult also. Like he wasn't an easy, simple horse to manage, but what an athlete and what a competitor. Very
Yeah.
careful, extremely, extraordinarily careful horse.
And then where did he land? Because that was you rode him till, was it the beginning of 2021? Is that, or if
Yeah,
I'm not mistaken?
sounds about right. Might have been a bit sooner than might have been 2020, but I'm honestly I can't remember exactly. Yes, he was purchased by Connor Swale.
Hmm.
The owners retained part of him, and he went on to have a very, very fruitful career with Connor. Like he had a fabulous few years.
So there we are in 2021. You've already reached the pinnacle of success several times. And then I don't imagine it was out of the blue, but come fall of 2021, you get a call from your friend Eric Lamaze, and he's offering you this, what appears from the rest of the equine world to be the opportunity of a lifetime to come ride his horses in Europe. So,
Go
no,
ahead. Sorry. I was going to say it didn't happen quite that way.
okay.
I'd gone over there to try horses for a student, and
Ah,
I had no idea this was even on Eric's mind. But it was funny while I was there, and this had never happened before. And I'd been to Eric's, a few times, well, many times over the years, but he actually wasn't even there. But Benji, who was his manager and close friend, had said, "Oh, Eric said, did you want to ride a couple of horses while you were here?" And I said, "Sure." And so I rode, I don't know, 4 or 5 horses that Eric had. And I thought it was just, for fun. And then we went for dinner, and Benji was like, "Yeah, I think Eric's thinking, if you'd like to ride." And I was like, "What do you mean?" I mean, it was just completely, I don't know, I was just a little dim that day, but I did not see that segue of I was riding these horses, and that means, oh, maybe you can actually show these horses. Because at the time I didn't know Eric's situation. Yeah, so then later Eric called me up and said, "Would you like to be part of the team?" And I of course said yes, but it was a lot of change because I was actually heading to California with my students, and that's where we were planning to show. And I had to turn it all around, and my students were very lovely and said, "That's great, let's go to Florida." And off we went, and that was the beginning of a huge change and a huge opportunity, as you say.
mm-hmm.
Life change.
What a great gift. And as I said, yeah, life change. So now, I mean, now you're at a whole new echelon in show jumping, because you've got a bit of a string of horses at this point. And I can't even imagine, well, I'm trying to imagine what did that feel like? Like, did just this feel like, wow, now I'm just going to this whole different level of riding. It's going to teach me new skills. It's going to draw on greater skills. Like, did you ever question, am I up for this? Not, did you want to do it, more like, am I able to take all this on?
That was my major number one concern. And I didn't really say that to Eric, but it was in my mind. Absolutely. What can I do this? Because I hadn't jumped at this level for years, years. And I mean, it's count me in, had done some great things, but I hadn't jumped him at he'd won a 5-star in the States, but he hadn't been jumping at that international level, and I hadn't for years. I was 59 years old. I was not a spring chicken by any means. I mean, I rode a lot and I kept up with the sport, but I certainly wasn't prepared. I was concerned I wasn't prepared. And I have to say, Eric was pretty wise about that. He started, me with horses that he thought would we were a good match, and it was, we trained a lot at home before going to the show at home in his farm in Florida. And he did a lot of practice and jumped a lot of courses and got back in the game, and it's still Wellington that first year was tough. I mean, I was, like you say, starting with a string of horses that had big reputation. They'd come off Eric's ride, and it was a big adjustment. And then, we're moving to Europe, and that's a whole nother thing. I've got family and a home and animals and everything at home. And we pulled up stakes and said, we're committing to do. And then 3 weeks after I got to Europe, I won Le Ball with
with two.
MSC. And it was like, it was like an absolute, I was pinching myself. I couldn't believe it. But then I felt, okay, and Eric gave me a lot of confidence. I will say he's someone who instills a lot of confidence in you. And yeah, we were a good fit. I mean, he was someone who I respected very much, his training and his guidance, and he did a lot for me. And he definitely, I don't think there's anyone else on the planet who would have given me the opportunity. And for that, I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah, and I will also say it sort of spoke to the generosity of his spirit in terms of him training you. I was on the outside watching, just looking at the press releases and marveling at your success. But I was also marveling at the fact that you could tell that Eric was really helping you and supporting you. And I thought, what a gift for the whole team to have his talent there as the chef to keep for that period of time. And I understand that he was probably pretty tough on you guys, just because, when you read some of the comments
Yep.
that he made, you could tell that it was like he had very high level of expectation from all of you, but it also looked like it took everybody's riding to a whole new level. And as a Canadian, I was really proud, I have to say, of all of you over there and the tremendous success you were having. Which brings me to another question along those lines. I feel like in the Canadian equestrian sport, it's tough because we don't have the depth of horses, and it does seem to fundamentally be based on a lack of the money that's available, say, in the US. So what are most riders doing to get horses to the sport? Are they doing it as syndicates, or are they just finding, fabulously wealthy families that want to buy horses, and they're always up for resale? Because I certainly see that a little bit as well. Like, what's your take on what's our challenge, I guess, as as far as the Canadian jumping team is concerned?
I've always found it very difficult in Canada to get sponsorship or people to buy horses. And I don't know if it's maybe partly my weakness in that I'm not a very good salesman of myself or saleswoman of myself. I'm not good at going out and, telling people what I can do for them and how great I am. And it's not who I am. I'm very insecure that way, actually. It's something I've always struggled with. And that's not to your benefit in this business. Probably I needed someone who was more of a cheerleader for me in that respect. And the success I've had, when I look back, it's been, like Torchy and Eric and people that have stepped up and made things happen for me. It's just, and I have tried. I mean, I've tried to do syndicates, and I've very much worked on it, but it's just been horses that have kind of come my way from some great owners I've had over the years. Obviously, I've been very lucky there, but to keep the trajectory going is tough. And I would say most people would say too, in Canada, there's less of a I don't know. It's not the same as the US. In the US, they will spend money on horses and riding at this level. You don't see it so much in Canada. A lot of our Canadian riders are funded by people that are not Canadian. You know, it's difficult. So I think everyone tries to find their own way. And obviously, the more talented riders are going to compete elsewhere where they're going, you know, jobs are going to be available. And that's everyone does what they have to do. But it's very difficult. It's the toughest part of the sport.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I've often thought, I wonder why we don't have agents. You know, they have agents for other sports.
Right.
And I don't know if it's because it doesn't generate obviously the same kind of income for an athlete. But yeah, that's a very it's a very challenging thing at your level.
Mm-hmm.
So then I just wanted to move on. So you have this great string of horses. You're you know reached another you know star level in riding, and then you announce that you're you know parting ways with the Rain family in March of this year. How hard was it to give up? You know, potentially would have been going off to the Olympics in Paris this summer. And I was thinking that had to be a really tough decision to walk away from that.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, it wasn't a one-sided decision.
No.
You know, so of course, it was very tough and you know, disappointing, bitterly disappointing. But
Mm-hmm.
as you say, you know, I've had to roll with those punches, as we all do in this sport and in this business. And you have to constantly be reinventing yourself and looking for other opportunities. And as much as I, you know, wish I was in a position that I felt I could continue, I am not, and
Mm-hmm.
I have to move to the next step, and that's what I've done, and I feel, yeah, I feel very good about where I am at this moment.
Yeah. So tell our listeners, I know you've landed in Tipperary, Ireland, with
Yes.
the Coolmore family. And I understand it was Cian O'Connor that connected you. Is that right?
Yes, well, Ian, I've, you know, known for many years actually. And initially when Nikki started competing in Europe and with Kian, I was still helping her a bit in Canada at the time, and I got to know Kian then because he was her trainer, and he was always very kind to me, and also someone that I really respected for his how professional he was, how systematic he was in the sport, and I liked his system. You know, it was very clear. He had a vision for his horses. He had a vision for himself, and I just immediately liked him when I first met him. And so I'd always followed his career, and he'd help me actually help me win a Grand Prix with Count Me In once when I was jumping off with Connor Swale, who was on a different horse, and he
Hmm.
told me he gave me some tips for the jump off, and he said, "You can win this, and I'm going to tell you how." And I did win, and I thanked him so much because he actually just
Wow.
came up to me and offered me his you know, offered me some help, and you know, I've always liked Ian, and so we stayed in touch. You know, of course we see each other as fellow competitors, and you know, but when this all happened, he phoned me and said, you know, would you think about coming to Ireland? And he told me a little bit about he was needing someone to help Alice, the youngest daughter of the Watchmans. And you know, I was immediately, I mean, I love Europe. I've lived in Europe the last 2.5 years, in Belgium and in Holland last year with the Rain family. So I'd never been to Ireland at all, but it appealed to me. The whole idea of it appealed to me. And I had a couple of other options. But this one, I think mostly because of Kian and because I really, you know, only heard wonderful things about the Watchmans. And I just felt that given after what, you know, the last year or so had been for me, I needed a change and I needed to feel, yeah, mentally better about things. And it felt right. It felt right. So I came over for 4 days and met the family and spent some time at Carlswood with Kian. And then I felt, you know, very secure in my decision. And spoke to my husband and said, if I go off again? And he said, you do what you need to do right now. And he helped make it happen for me. So I've been very fortunate that way. So here I am, and
Wow.
been here 3.5 weeks and just really, really loving it.
Well, it's interesting because it sounds like your gut has led you through most of these decisions in your life, and it doesn't seem to have let you down yet. So I imagine you are on the right path. And so what does it look like for you? Obviously, you've been, hired to help the family train their daughter, and I understand there's 2 boys as well. Am I correct in that?
Tom and Max ride with Kian at Carlswood, which is approximately 2.5 hours from here in Fetard, where the Coolmore show jumping is based. And Alice, Watchman, she is based here in Coolmore with her horses. And the boys, obviously it's their farm as well, but at the moment they're based in Carlswood with Kian and doing the tour with him. So we often end up at the same shows. That's our, intention. And it's a very far-flung team actually with Kian. He has a trainer, Jerry Mullins, with Nikki Walker in Spruce Meadows right now. He has other trainers in different areas. So his operation is vast. But obviously he's oversees everything, and everyone who's part of this team at Carlswood and at Coolmore are very closely associated and bring their professional skills to the operation. And it really honestly runs like a well-oiled machine, and there is not one thing that is left to chance. The program is essential and consistent, and that's something that I thrive on, is consistency and attention to detail, and a program that makes sense for each horse, and is tailored for each horse, and is very, as I say, it's very consistent, and I really enjoy that. So it's working very, very well.
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect fit. So my last question is there hope that sometime soon in the future that you may have another mount for yourself, or is that on the table?
Yes, it absolutely is. That's something that Keen and I had discussed, and he's very keen on me having horses to ride. And there's a couple of stalls here with my name on them, so I just have to get them.
You just have to fill them.
Exactly, which is usually not. Yes, that's hopefully that's going to happen quite soon. So looking forward to that and what the future brings in that respect as well. I'm really enjoying working with Alice. She's just a lovely young rider and a lovely person. And it's been something that I've really enjoyed, and looking forward to the future as we go.
Well, I'm sure it's a wonderful gift for her as well. And we'll certainly miss you up here in Canada, but do look forward to hearing of your great successes to come. And thank you so much for speaking with us today.
My pleasure, Catherine. Thank you.
You're welcome.